The wind tore across the prairie like it knew sorrow. It rattled the chapel doors and whistled through the cracks in the wooden cross as they lowered his coffin into the dust. She stood at the edge of the mourners, the hem of her ivory dress, soaked in mud, her veil trembling like a ghost against the bitter sky. Clara's hands were trembling too, not from the cold, but from the way fate had yanked her heart out before she'd even unpacked her suitcase. The letter he'd sent her just weeks ago was still in her pocket, the ink smudged from the heat of her palms. "Can't wait to meet you, Clara," it read. "I'll have the porch light burning when you arrive." There was no porch light, now. Only a smoldering lamp above an empty doorway. No man in a clean shirt and shy smile waiting on the steps. Just a town too small to remember kindness, and too used to burying its sons. They said it was an accident, a horse that spooked, a rifle that fired, but Clara looked around and saw something colder in their eyes, something no bride should see on the day she was meant to start her life. They left her alone beside the grave, a wedding ring still in her pocket, and a storm rising over the hills. Subscribe now because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. The town of Bitterwind didn't get its name from the breeze. The air, always, tasted of old regret, like rust, dust, and the memory of gunpowder. It clung to Clara's clothes, settled into the lines of her hands, and whispered through the wooden planks of her porch each night, like it was trying to talk her out of staying. But stay she did. She'd arrived on the 5:40 stagecoach with a stitched-up satchel, one good boot, and a name she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. Clara Wren. It sounded too soft for this place, too much like someone who still believed in poetry and porch lights. That girl had died the moment she stepped off the coach and saw the black cloth hung on the door of the chapel. Now, a week later, her dress was still folded neatly in the chest by the bed, still white, still waiting. But no one else was. Bitterwind was a town that ran on cattle, suspicion, and the weight of unspoken history. It had one saloon, 2 churches, and 3 men who called themselves sheriff, none of whom ever agreed on anything except that Clara Wren didn't belong. She heard it in the way they paused when she entered a room, in the way the storekeeper rang her total twice, slower the second time, just to avoid meeting her eyes, and in the way the preacher's wife crossed to the other side of the street, clutching her basket like Clara might steal her apples, or her soul. Some said it was the scar above her eyebrow, like a white thread someone forgot to cut. Others whispered about the limp in her left leg, a souvenir from a fire she never spoke of. But most just didn't know how to make space for a woman who didn't cry at a funeral. Clara had stood straight-backed while they laid Samuel Harrow's home in the earth, the man she was meant to marry. She didn't wail, she didn't faint. She just looked at the casket and whispered, "Well, so much for that." And that apparently was worse than tears. It was unnatural, unfeminine, untrustworthy. So they avoided her like a ghost. She'd taken up residence in Samuel's ranch house, a weathered 2-bedroom on the edge of the property, shaded by wind-twisted cottonwoods. His will had been vague but fair, and no one had contested it. Not even his cousin Roy, who'd clearly expected to inherit the cattle and the deed. Clara figured it was only because they assumed she'd sell it, pack up, and vanish. But she didn't. Each morning, she woke before dawn, lit the stove, and boiled coffee so strong it could melt nails. She dragged herself into Samuel's old duster, pulled her hair into a knot, and started learning the land. The horses came first, then the fence lines, then the books, dusty ledgers tucked behind the flour bin. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew what she wasn't going to do. She wasn't going to leave. Not until she found out what really happened to him. Not until she understood why the town's smiles froze when they talked about Samuel Harrow. Because she'd seen something in Roy's eyes at the funeral. Not grief, not surprise, relief, and that alone told her everything wasn't as it seemed. By the second week, the silence was louder than any gunshot. Clara didn't mind quiet. She'd lived most of her life in it, first from the fire that took her parents, then from the years with her aunt who spoke in half-sentences in disapproval. But this kind of quiet was different. This quiet watched you. This quiet, judged. The children stared from behind fence posts. The men nodded too slowly. The women offered, her stale bread and forced politeness, then whispered behind curtained windows. She'd caught snippets. Mail order. Came too late. Some say she knew. I heard she used to be married before. Husband vanished. None of it was true. And all of it was. In a town like Bitterwind, truth bent to the shape of the loudest mouth, Clara. Fed the chickens, mended her dress, and kept her mouth shut. There were letters she never answered. One from her aunt in Arkansas, another from the agency that had matched her with Samuel. They all asked if she was okay. She never wrote back. At tea. Night. She sat on the front porch with a lantern and watched the hills. Sometimes she thought she saw someone out there, just beyond the fence at the edge of the cottonwoods, watching her. But when she rose, the shadow vanished. She started sleeping with the shotgun under the bed. Just in case. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of not knowing why he had. The ranch dog wouldn't go near the barn. He was a quiet mutt with one eye and more scars than fur, but he was loyal. Until night came. Then he whined at the porch, tucked his tail, and refused to step off the stoop. Clara went anyway. She brought a lantern and the old key Samuel had once mentioned in his last letter. She found a set of boots too big for him, a hat too clean to be used, and beneath the floorboards, a letter addressed to someone named J.C. The envelope wasn't sealed. The ink wasn't Samuel's. She read it once, then again, and her hands started shaking. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe. I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. The wind changed the day he rode in. Clara felt it first, in the way the dust hung lower to the ground, clinging to the sagebrush instead of dancing like usual. The cottonwoods stopped rustling, like they were holding their breath. Even the air carried something different, not colder, not warmer, just charged. She was stacking firewood by the fence when she heard the hoofbeats. Not a whole team, just one horse, pacing slow and steady. Not the rushed gait of someone with news, nor the cocky swagger of a ranch hand trying to impress. It was measured, intentional. She stood brushing splinters from her palms as he crested the hill. He wore a gray trail coat and a hat dipped low over his brow, shadowing his face. The horse was dark, nearly black, and moved like it knew the land. Clara squinted against the sun. As he approached, he dismounted without a word, boots crunching against the brittle earth. For a moment, they just stood there, 5 paces apart. Two ghosts in a place that didn't have room for even. "On you, Samuel's widow?" the man asked, his voice rough around the edges like a match scraping flint. "Would have been," Clara said. He nodded, like that answer suited him just fine. "I'm Colt." She raised an eyebrow. "Like the gun?" His lips quirked, barely. "Like the horse, but I've heard both." He glanced toward the barn, then back to her. "Heard there's work. Fence lines falling, cattle scattered." "I didn't put up a notice," she said flatly. He met her eyes for the first time. Really met them. Not like a man looking at a woman, but like someone scanning a map he half remembered. "Didn't say you did." And that was that. By evening he was hauling lumber. She didn't offer him a room, and he didn't ask. Just rolled out a bedroll, in the barn loft like it was the most natural thing in the world. The ranch hadn't heard laughter in weeks, but when he cursed under his breath after hitting his thumb with a hammer, low and sharp and almost boyish, Clara found herself smirking into her soup. She hated that. Colt worked like he was born to sweat. Quiet, efficient, focused. EQ. Didn't push conversation, but when she spoke, he listened. Really listened. Eyes on her. Not the ground. Not her scar. Not her limp. Just her. That was worse than staring. He asked questions others avoided. "Did you love him? Why'd you come all this way? What are you really looking for out here?" She didn't answer most of them, not because she didn't know, but because the truth still tasted like splinters. On the third day, they rode fence lines together. The sun spilled gold over the hills, lighting the dry grass like fire. The silence between them stretched out, comfortably, not empty, but full of something unspoken. At one point, she dismounted to check a broken post. When she stumbled slightly on the slope, he didn't offer his hand. He just waited, letting her rise on her own. She liked that more than she meant to. Later, he spoke so softly she almost thought the wind imagined it. "I don't think Samuel died the way they said." Clara froze, her hands tightening on the reins. She turned slowly. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because men like Samuel don't die by accident, and men like Roy don't grieve unless they're guilty." A long pause stretched between them. "Thought you said you were just here for work," she murmured. He met her gaze again. "I never said that." That night, she found an envelope nailed to her door. No name, no return. Inside was a single note, written in a jagged, hurried scrawl. "He died because he found out. You'll be next if you keep digging." There was a smudge of blood on the corner. She stared at it for a long time, the lantern flickering beside her. Then she folded the note, slid it into the drawer beside her bed, and loaded the shotgun. What if someone saw you for who you are, not what you carry? Subscribe. One day, that story might be yours too. By the end of the week, Bitterwind was whispering louder than ever. They saw her walking beside Colt at dusk. Saw the way he opened the saloon door for her and the way she didn't flinch when he stood close. Heard that she let him fix the roof. Heard that she let him stay. Women crossed their arms tighter. Men spit when they said her name. Fools wrapped around her finger. Can't trust drifters. She'll ruin him, same as she ruined the last. Even the preacher's wife left a pie on the fence post, untouched, with a note that read, "Best not forget what happened to the last man who got too close." Clara tossed the pie to the pigs. One evening, she found Colt in the barn, brushing down the stallion Samuel used to ride. The horse had never taken to anyone since his death, but it stood still now, snorting softly under Colt's hand. "You knew him," she said, stepping into the shadowed light. Colt didn't look at her. "Samuel?" "Yeah, long time ago. Before Bitterwind." "Why didn't you say?" "Didn't seem like the right time." "What is the right time?" she asked. He finally looked up. "When you trust me." The silence pressed close. Not sharp, not cold, just real. She stepped closer. "Did he tell you anything? Before he died?" Colt nodded slowly. "He sent me a letter. Said he was in over his head. That people he trusted had turned, and that if anything happened to him, someone needed to watch over you." Her breath caught. "He said that?" "He did." Clara's throat ached. She looked away, blinking too fast. "I didn't come for the cattle," Colt said. "I came for you." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the barn creak, to the coyotes howl, to the whisper of wind against the glass. And somewhere beneath it all, she thought she heard footsteps. The betrayal didn't come with a gun. It came with a smile. Roy Harrow showed up on a Sunday, freshly shaved, wearing the jacket Samuel used to wear to town meetings, like he could steal more than just the ranch if he dressed the part. He strolled onto Clara's porch, with two men behind him and a legal-looking letter in his hand. "Miss Wren," he said with a grin too slick to trust, "seems we've had ourselves a misunderstanding." Clara didn't reach for her shotgun, but her eyes didn't flinch. "That right?" Roy held up the paper. "Turns out Samuel's will, the one that left you the property, wasn't properly signed. Technicality, of course, but the judge saw fit to transfer ownership unto the next of kin." Her stomach dropped, slow and heavy like a stone in water. "You forged this," she said, barely above a whisper. Roy's grin widened. "Prove it." The men behind him laughed, one tall and gap-toothed, the other with a scar on his cheek that made his face twitch when he smiled. Roy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This land was never yours. You're just a mail-order mistake that came too late." He turned and walked back toward his wagon. "You've got till sundown to be gone." Colt wasn't there. He'd ridden into town for supplies. She was alone, and, for the first time in months, she felt it. She packed slowly, not because she was giving in, but because she couldn't breathe. Everything in the house smelled like Samuel, like beginnings, like grief she hadn't earned, and now never would. She sat on the edge of the bed and felt the weight of every step that led her here, every mile, every silence she'd swallowed just to be allowed to stay, and now it was gone. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked out the back door, with only what she could carry, a saddlebag of clothes, a tin of biscuits, and the letter she'd found hidden under the barn floorboards. She didn't know where she was going. She just went. The wind howled across the open fields, kicking up dust and dead grass. The sky turned a cruel gray, the kind that didn't promise rain, just mood. She walked for hours, past the creek, past the place where she'd once seen a bobcat watching from the ridge. Her limp slowed her, and the cold made it worse, biting at her knee like a rusted nail. By the time the sun dipped low, her boots were soaked through, and her breath came in sharp gasps. The land blurred, shadows stretched. Her knees buckled once, then again. She collapsed by an old oak tree, the same kind they hung horseshoes on for luck. She curled into herself, arms wrapped tight, face in the dirt. She didn't want to be strong. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted it all to stop. She didn't hear Colt ride up, didn't hear the hoofbeats or the soft gasp when he saw her curled against the roots. She only noticed when warmth settled beside her. A blanket draped over her shoulders. A hand on her back and steady, solid, not grabbing, not pulling, just there. She didn't look at him. "You were right," she murmured, voice raw. "They took it, all of it. Said the will didn't count. Said I wasn't real." He was quiet a long time, then softly, "You're the realest thing I've seen in this town." She turned her head slowly. His face was shadowed, hat low, jaw tight, but his eyes were soft, not pitying, just present. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. She blinked. "But the ranch isn't what made you strong." He sat beside her, leaning against the tree, legs stretched out in front of him. He didn't touch her again, didn't offer promises or plans. He just kept her company. Two figures in the cold, watching the last light die behind the hills. Later, when the moon rose, he lit a small fire. She watched the flames, eyes heavy. "Why'd you come back?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Because when I lost everything," he said finally, "nobody came looking for me. And I swore if I ever saw that look in someone else's eyes, I wouldn't make the same mistake." Clara swallowed hard. "You don't have to save me," she said. "I know." She turned, met his gaze. "Then why are you still here?" His voice barely broke the crackling fire. "Because you don't need saving. You just need someone who won't leave." They stayed by the tree until dawn. She didn't cry. He didn't move. And in that stillness, something began to shift. Not a storm. Not a spark. Just a breath. A beginning. They thought she was broken. But someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you, tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here. The day they rode back to the ranch, the wind had stilled. Not in defeat, in anticipation. Clara sat taller in the saddle, her jaw set like the edge of a blade. Colt rode beside her, one hand near the rifle, the other relaxed on the reins. The sun hadn't yet climbed high, but the light struck the homestead in long, hard shadows, like the land was waiting to see who would blink first. Roy wasn't there. Not yet. But his men had been. The barn door hung crooked, hinges torn. Fence lines were slashed, and on the porch, the same legal letter lay in the dirt, boot-printed and torn. Clara dismounted slowly, scanning the damage. "I built this with bare hands," she muttered. "Every board, every nail." Colt stood beside her. "Then let's build it again. Better." They worked until their hands bled, fixing fence posts, repairing the roof. clearing broken glass from the kitchen floor. Clara didn't ask permission. Colt didn't give orders. They moved together like they had done this for years. Sweat and silence, a rhythm all their own. When the water pump refused to draw, Colt cursed softly, rolling up his sleeves. Clara watched as his muscles strained under the rusted bolt. The well had nearly run dry, but by dusk, water gushed from the spout like something had been set free. That night, they sat by the fire in the rebuilt barn, cold stew in tin bowls, the smell of hay and ash thick in the air. "I never wanted to be anyone's bride," Clara confessed. "I just didn't want to be forgotten." "You're not," Colt said, voice low. "Not now." She looked at him. In the orange glow, his face seemed softer, worn but safe. "What about you?" she asked. "What were you running from? Before all this?" Colt paused. The fire cracked. "My brother," he said finally. "He died because of a mistake I made. Trusted the wrong man. And when it happened, I couldn't look anyone in the eye after that. So I left." Clara's breath hitched, quiet. "You think staying here makes that better?" "No," he said, staring into the flames. "But loving something again might." The next morning, they staked new boundaries, not just for the land, but for each other. He taught her how to tie a proper fence knot. She showed him the secret spring tucked beneath the cottonwoods where cold water ran even in drought. They dug a garden, mended the chicken coop, started sketching plans for a second barn, and at night, they sat on the porch beneath a quilt, watching. Stars burned their slow stories across the sky. "I want to make this a horse ranch," Clara said one evening, voice full of quiet fire. "Not just cows and fences. I want to raise something fast, something wild." Colt smiled. "You'll need a good name." She thought for a long moment. "Ashwood," she whispered, "for what burned, and what still stands. But peace is fragile in places built on blood and power." Sheriff Madsen rode in by noon 2 days later. Brown duster, black gloves, eyes like tarnished brass. He wasn't crooked, not openly, but he was close enough to Roy to smell like his cologne. He dismounted without a word, scanned the ranch, and let his silence settle like smoke. "Got a complaint," he said finally. "Trespassing, vandalism, claim jumping." "This is my land," Clara said, arms crossed. "Paperwork says otherwise. I was married to Samuel Wren." "And yet," Madsen said, pulling out the same crumpled legal letter, "your name don't seem to matter much, miss." He turned to Colt. "And you," he said coolly, "you got a warrant in Colorado. Name change don't hide everything. Son." Colt didn't flinch. Madsen swung up into his saddle. "You've got 3 days to clear out. After that, I'll come back, and I won't be coming to talk." He rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving silence in his wake. Clara didn't move for a long time. Finally, she said, "Is it true?" Colt nodded once. "I was young, stupid. I took a fall for someone who ran. They pinned a theft on me, and I left before they could make it worse." She looked at him, not angry, just tired. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want it to matter." "Well, it does now," she said softly, and she walked inside. That night, she didn't join him by the fire. She sat alone in the bedroom Samuel had once claimed, staring at the map Colt had drawn. For the stables they hadn't built yet. She thought about leaving, about riding south, starting over again where her name didn't echo through saloons and courtrooms. But the fire inside her, the one Roy tried to kill, the one that Colt lit again with each quiet kindness, refused to go out. The next morning, she found Colt by the corral brushing the stallion Samuel left behind. "I'm not afraid of your past," she said. Colt turned slowly. "But if we're gonna fight," she continued, "we fight together. No secrets, no running." He nodded, eyes glassy. "You sure?" She stepped closer, took his hand. "I'm tired of surviving. I want to live with you." He kissed her then, not like a savior, but like a partner, like a promise. And the wind, as if in approval, finally blew warm again. Tension peak insert. You've come this far with her. You felt that, didn't you? Subscribe. I want you to meet someone else tomorrow. Someone just as forgotten. The town gathered like vultures in Sunday best. Dust Hollow hadn't seen a real standoff since the preacher punched the mayor over whiskey taxes. But today, they came for blood. Or maybe for spectacle. Roy Harrow stood on the courthouse steps, with Sheriff Madsen flanking his side. Legal deeds fanned out like playing cards in a gambler's hand. His voice boomed through the square, self-satisfied. This is justice, folks. Law don't bend just 'cause someone cries hard enough. This land's mine now. Clara stood at the edge of the square, back straight, coat buttoned high. Colt was beside her but not in front of her. She had told him, "Let me do this." The townsfolk parted for her like a wave cut through stone. Whispers chased her boots. Mail-order widow, witch-blooded, took a man's place, but she didn't flinch. Not now. She stepped up the wooden steps like they were her altar. "I've come to make my choice," she said, voice calm. Roy blinked. "What? Choice?" She pulled from her coat the final letter, Samuel's real will, the one signed before witnesses, sealed in a tobacco tin beneath the hearthstone. She'd found it 2 nights ago, after Colt had torn the chimney clean out and rebuilt it from scratch. She handed it to Sheriff Madsen. He read it. Twice. And then the sheriff, not crooked, just tired, looked at Roy and said, "This changes everything." The crowd gasped. Some cheered, others frowned. Clara didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply turned to Colt, hand outstretched. "Come with me." His brows lifted slightly. "Where?" "Away from all this. Ashwood's ours, now. Let's take it and leave this place behind." Colt hesitated, not because he didn't want her, but because it was the first time anyone had ever offered him a future. She stepped closer. "We could raise horses. Or nothing. Just live. Just be." Colt reached for her hand. "Only if we do it together." They didn't stay to watch Roy scream, or to hear the judge revoke his claim, or to see the sheriff finally take his badge off and toss it into the dirt. They left before the dust settled, with a wagon, 2 horses, and a single bag of belongings. Enough. Clara didn't look back. 1 year later, the stars hung low over the valley, bright and clean like someone had washed the sky. The ranch they built wasn't grand, but it was theirs. A porch that faced the morning sun. A barn that echoed with the soft nicker of colts. A windmill that sang when the breeze came through just right. Clara stood under the arch of bare-limbed trees, dress hem brushing the frosted grass. She wore no veil, no lace, just a silver pin Samuel had once given her, and a blue ribbon tied in her hair, the same Colt had kept in his pocket for months. Colt stood beside her in a linen shirt and a look that spoke more than vows ever could, like, "Preacher said something." They nodded. No crowd, no celebration, just 2 hands joined under the stars. Later, as the fire crackled low and sleep began to settle, Clara lay against Colt's chest and whispered, "I think I want to name her after your brother." Colt's eyes glistened. "Caleb if it's a boy," she added. "Or Calla if it's a girl. That okay?" He kissed her forehead. "More than okay." She smiled into the dark. "Funny," she murmured. "All this time I thought I was a burden, a mistake. A curse sent by fate." Colt's voice wrapped around her like warmth. "You were never a curse, Clara." He took her hand, held it gently. "You were someone's miracle all along." She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.